Welcome to week 2. This week I'm going to have you focusing on multimodality in particular. I'm going to have you finish chapters 5 through 8 in Understanding Digital Literacies. In those chapters there's a number of new concepts introduced, but in particular I'd like you to really hone in on 3 really important ones. The first one is on multitasking. There's a lot of information there, and we're going to come back to that later in the semester. The next one is the concept of critical literacies, which may not be new to some of you. You may already be familiar with this idea, but it's just applying them to digital literacy spaces. And then the last one is on discourse systems, which is probably one of the most important concepts of the semester. In the second half of the week, we're going to have 2 additional readings. The one is Pedagogy of Multiliteracies. This is a foundational text in the field of digital literacies. Some of you might be surprised to see that it's now 23 years old. It was first published in 1996. But this is one of those articles that's still cited over and over again. And the main reason why is because we still use the definition of multimodality that is introduced in this text. Of course, a lot of the examples are going to seem outdated, but it's really important to understand this concept that the New London Group introduces in this text. I'll go into it a little bit more here in a second. And then the last reading that I'm having you read is an article from Jody Shipka. This one focuses on multimodal projects. The reason I'm having you read it is because this is one of the first readings that specifically tries to apply multimodality to writing pedagogy. So this will be useful for some of our upcoming projects. I'd really like you to start thinking about pedagogy as we go through some of these additional readings. What might be surprising about Shipka's text is that this one is also a little bit older, but it's also a foundational text. And not all the projects that she discusses are digital. A lot of the projects that she talks about in here are physical objects. In fact, you might find that some of the projects that she explains in the article sound like projects that you're already doing, but it is important to try to start thinking of those projects as being multimodal, as including more than one mode of meaning in the text that is being conveyed. It's also important in this text to remember that she has students write reflections as part of creating the multimodal text. I think this is a really good practice. The unfortunate thing is, in this article, she doesn't go into great depth about the statements of goals and purposes. It's just mentioned offhandedly. It was a trade-off. So Shipka goes into the statements of goals and purposes in some future work, particularly in a book that she wrote called A Composition Made Whole. The problem is, if we read that, we would miss the information about the projects. So I had to choose, would we rather learn the information about the projects, or would you rather learn the information about the statements of goals and purposes? I wish that we could have covered both. But basically in the statements of goals and purposes, she has the students explain what they did in the project and why they made the choices they did. And I think that second part is a really important part to both critical literacies and rhetorical literacies. That is to say, deeply considering why people make the choices that they make in literacy practices and considering the productive side of literacy in those practices. All right, so it's important that we do take a little moment here and talk specifically about what it means to be multimodal. So as you read the New London Group, do make sure that you're paying attention to the 5 modes that they present there. I do know that article is a little bit dense, and it's written by a number of authors, so it's not always the best written. But if you get nothing else from the article, make sure that you're paying attention to those 5 modes. So let's go over those 5 modes now. Probably the mode that you're already most familiar with is the linguistic mode. This is conveying meaning through alphabetic text or through spoken language. So when you read a book, you are getting meaning through the alphabetic text that you read on the page. When you're watching a video like this, you're getting meaning through the words that I'm saying. That's the linguistic mode. It's usually the one that is the easiest for people to wrap their heads around. It's also the one that we most closely associate with literacy already, so it's usually the one that requires the least explanation. I think the next most important one, and the one that you're likely to already be familiar with, is the visual mode. The visual mode is conveying meaning through visuals, so through anything that comes in through your eyes. Of course, if you look at this right now, you're getting a lot of information in the visual mode here. If you look behind me, you've got all these books. This is telling you certain information about me and about maybe the kind of video that I'm trying to create here if I have this as a background. If I had, say, sports pictures in the background, or if I had action figures in the background, it would convey a different meaning to you about not only who I am, but what kind of video this is as well. Visual, anything conveying meaning through the visual mode can be just taken in through the eyes too. It doesn't have to be something like what you see here. It can be something as simple as colors or brightness or anything like that. So if I made this video really dark, it would feel different to you. If I had the background be a bright orange, it would feel different to you. All of that information is included in the visual mode. All that information is sometimes separated out from multimodality into specifically visual literacies. The next one of the multimodal modes is the aural mode, A-U-R-A-L. It's anything that is conveyed to the viewer through sound. The most obvious way that meaning is conveyed through the aural mode is through music. So if you've ever watched a movie scene without the music and then with the music, you'll know what I mean. You're getting a very different meaning depending on what music is in the background and how that music is incorporated and how loud it is. But it also includes anything that you hear, anything that comes in through the ear. So for example, the tone of my voice is included in the aural mode. So you might get this confused with the linguistic mode, and there is a lot of overlap there. But what I'm saying and the way I'm saying it are two actually different modes. So for example, if I were to say, hey, do your homework, or hey, do your homework, or hey, do your homework, or hey, do your homework. Those are very different things. So the linguistic part of it stayed exactly the same, but the oral part of it changed. My tone of voice changed, and that conveyed a different meaning to you. And I'm sure that you read that meaning in each of those things that I said. The next mode is the gestural mode. Obviously this includes gestures. I've been making gestures until now. So gestures do convey meaning. If I do this, you know what it means. If I do this, if you know what it means. If I do this, you know what it means. But the gestural mode also includes any kind of movement that takes place. So this includes facial expressions. This includes people moving around a space. This includes the information that you might get from a GIF, the movement that takes place within that image as opposed to a static image that you would just see by itself. Anything that includes movement is included in the gestural mode. And then the final mode is the spatial mode. The spatial mode is any meaning that's conveyed through positioning. So right now, there is meaning conveyed through positioning. This video would feel very different if I decided to record it like this, than if I decided to record it like this. This is about as far back as I can go. That is part of it. If I leaned over to one side versus if I leaned over to the other, that would also be part of the spatial mode. But it includes a lot of other things. I think that the most interesting way that the spatial mode is part of our day-to-day life is the way that things are positioned on a page or on a website. The space that is around text conveys meaning to us in a certain way. The simplest way to explain this is paragraphing is part of the spatial mode. When we decide to hit that enter and start a new paragraph, we are conveying meaning to people not through the linguistics, but through the space on the page. By adding that extra space and starting a new paragraph, we are saying, here we are starting a new idea. This is also true in things like bulleted points or numbered list. By making a bullet point, a list that's in bullet points, I'm conveying meaning that these things are part of a group, but each one is distinct. If I do it as a numbered list instead, I'm saying these things are part of a list, but they're ranked. And we know that through the spacing on the page, not just through the visuals that we get, that things are spaced in a certain way. You might be finding that there is a lot of overlap between these things. So the visual mode and the spatial mode obviously have some overlap. The visual mode and the gestural mode obviously have some overlap. The gestural mode and the spatial mode obviously have some overlap. The oral mode and the linguistics mode have overlap if people are speaking, and so on. And that's true. That is the case. I also want to point out that there are these 5 modes that are presented, and they're the 5 most common modes, but there actually are other modes that are possible as well. Things like the tactile mode, which is information that you would get through touch, and you might see that in something like Braille, or the information that you might get through smell, so through like incense or aromatic smells that you might find in certain spaces. So those are possible too, but we just don't normally use them to convey meaning in the way that we do the other 5 modes. So anyway, that's an overview of what multimodality is. That's going to be our main focus this week. It's a huge component of digital literacy. So make sure that you understand what these modes are and how you might be getting meaning through them.